welcome. For those of you who were here 2 weeks ago, I gave a broad overview and looked at the management um, component, if you like. Today, I will be looking much more at the career learning component. This is one that does worry me quite often in some ways because it's one that Gatsby is not terribly hot on. And therefore, whilst you're perhaps rushing about to do all the things you need to do for Gatsby, sometimes this can get, shall we say, a little bit lost in the excitement. So what I'm going to do is take you through how Complete Careers, who is a licensed awarding body, use the career mark approach, look at trying to help you ensure that you have the right sort of career learning in place. I'm hopefully now going to share my screen. And hopefully everybody will be able to see that. I'm going to go for the slideshow from the beginning. So, I've shot into the second slide. But anyway, it just said what we were doing now. And we are starting with an overview of the career mark learning or planning component. So let's hope it works. Why does sometimes... Oh, there we go. Okay. So we're looking at last week, for those of you who came, and there is also a recording available if you want to catch up. But I looked at all the bits of the Gatsby benchmarks and the quality and careers criteria. But today I'm just going to focus on, if you like, the ones that I think are important for the career learning. So the first one here is the identified appropriate and progressive learning and behavioural outcomes that you're trying to get for your learners. It references here the Careers CDI, Career Development Institute's national framework, which is called the Careers Employability and Enterprise Education. It has learning outcomes for Key Stage 2, 3, 4 and 5 at the moment. There's 17 learning outcomes at each key stage and they are progressive. It may be that your learners don't need every single one of them or that they need to go up or down a key stage depending on who they are. Note the ability of the learners. So it's important to know the context of your learners and maybe even to have done some sort of baseline assessment of what they know when they come into your school, whether that's at Key Stage 7 or Key Stage 5 or somewhere in between. So there's also these that are important for the learning, evaluating how it involves students in assessing and meeting their needs. So again, it's not enough really to look at those outcomes and say, well, I know what the young people need. You should be working with whatever method of student voice you have to try and identify what they think their needs are. And as they move through the school and get the variety of learning inputs and record the learning, to work out the impact it has on them. So it's important to think about that. I think I've repeated myself there. So I don't know why there's two. I had a bit of a brainstorm. Sorry about that. So the next one is the one to do with benchmark 2. So It's about labour market information. Obviously, you have to learn how to access information or learn how to interpret it. Because again, there's two sorts of, if you like, LMI. There is labour market information and there is labour market intelligence. And one, by its name, intelligence, is more use than the information on its own. If you see, for example, that somewhere is making redundancies and there might be 10 of them, say, 10 jobs lost at wherever in your local area. Now, that is the information, but the intelligence is, well, okay, so 10 jobs are going, but is that 10 out of 20? Is it 10 out of 200? Is it 10 out of 50? Because that makes a difference. And that is where the interpretation, if you like, comes in. 10 out of 200 jobs is a lot less worrying, if you like, for unemployment figures than 10 out of 20 jobs. So do think about that and where do they find this and how do they interpret it? You've also got things like internships, T-levels, apprenticeships, and they need to know about all these things. Okay. Thinking about who works or what work is available in their local area is also important. And this is potentially important both for your staff as well as your students and your parents. I often assess and I will ask young people, do they know what big local employers there are? And sometimes they haven't really been encouraged to think this through or been given the relevant information. And again, it can be quite easy to change it. There are websites, for example, the National Office of Statistics, which has various things about job adverts in an area and salaries and so on. But if people just also think about what is in their locality, if there's in somewhere like Lincoln, we have a university. Well, in actual fact, we have two. And obviously, they are fairly large employers, particularly the big one in the middle of town these days. So that will be a big employer. If there's any sort of healthcare provision, and of course there's always some, but if there's a hospital, then the NHS may well be a very large local employer. Local government, etc., are still pretty big in a lot of areas, although they may not be as big as they were. Education, as well as universities, schools, and colleges, employ a lot of staff. And I'm not just talking teaching staff, they're employing lots of other people to keep the buildings maintained, everything functioning, etc. So there is all that going on as well. So information about local employment and helping not only the young people, but also their parents and carers know about it. As we benchmark 4 is again thinking about how subject teachers can deliver some of this career learning. Please remember, career learning is not just about jobs, it's about self, it's about jobs, and it's about moving where you are, if you like, now, from where you are now to where you want to be. So in subjects, it's about transferable skills, it's about employability skills, it's also about self-awareness of what you're good at, what your strengths are, areas you might need to improve, and also potentially about what careers any particular subject supports. Again, embedding career-related learning in subject-based activities, okay? And moving them through and up from key stage 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, as it were. So how are you assessing the learning as well? How are you recording it? How are you assessing it? And they're all related to 4. Now, again, you probably saw this slide last week if you were here, but I wanted to remind you particularly about the bits in red, if you like. And you're looking, when you do a quality board, to find out whether the youngsters are learning about these things. So themselves, if you like, how are they learning about what they're good at, what they need to develop, what their strengths and weaknesses are, what their characteristics are? And at the moment, things like COVID may be a way of getting them to think about some of those strengths that they've got. Are they good with IT? Are they not so good? Are they good at working on their own, or do they find that really difficult? Are they good at managing their time or not? Then learning about careers in the world of work, that can be in their locality, it can be more broadly, it can be from individuals, it can be from information sources. Is it accurate? Is it relevant? How are they recording it? And then, in a sense, developing their career management, employability, and enterprise skills. Because the other thing about learning about the world of work is learning about, well, which jobs might suit me? What am I likely to be good at? What do I enjoy? And okay, we don't always pick the thing we enjoy most, nor do we always pick the thing we're really, really best at. But that surely needs to come into some of it. So moving on to Gatsby Benchmark 5. Again, this is where sometimes, again, I worry. There are encounters with employers that are going on. But what does each encounter teach the young person, if you like, or what are your intended learning outcomes? If you have a speaker, they can't do everything all at once necessarily. So what is it you want them to try to teach or get across or help your learners understand, for example? Is it what might be expected of the person in their job? Is it the sort of learning pathway they took to get to their job? Is it about how their job has changed and continues to change? Is it about the work patterns of their job? Is it about the progression routes in their job? It could be any one of those things or more than one of those things, but it is important to think about that learning and then what your young people are going to do with that learning. Okay, so, and you'll see in 5.13 at the bottom there, understanding of progression, pathways, employability skills, working life, and career development. Now, again, it may be that all employers are not familiar with all learning pathways anymore. So, again, you need to make sure that, well, this is the way I did it, and it may have been go to school, go to uni, get the job. But these days, there may be other ways because there may be apprenticeships that will take you into a job that it used not to take you into. It may be that you can do a BTEC or a T level or whatever. So, again, think about those. The employability skills these days could potentially be more than they used to be. Digital skills are very important. Being able to sell yourself potentially online so that you can interview through video is important potentially. Maybe being able to know that you can work at home and you have that self-discipline may now be becoming something employers will want to know about. And also the fact that you may be expected to gain additional qualifications during the course of your career. Lifelong learning is something I've always been passionate about and have continued to do, but is it something everybody thinks about, or do they think, right, I've done my GCSEs, I've done my A levels, that's it, or I've got my degree, that's it. Okay. Number 6, again, meaningful experience of a workplace. And again, what is the learning? I would always say again, and I know that sometimes it seems difficult and time consuming, but what is it you want young people to learn from their work experience? Do you want them to learn again about the range of jobs within a particular sector? Do you want them to learn the qualifications people have or the route they took in? Do you want them to learn something about themselves? And I always think that's important. Maybe they can learn that they're good at communicating with people, or maybe they'll learn that actually they don't particularly like being the front face of a company. Maybe they can learn that they are very organised and that they can get lots of jobs done. Maybe they'll learn that actually they do struggle to stay focused on a task. Maybe they'll learn that they don't like the idea of sitting in an office all day and that they think they'd maybe better have a rethink about doing that. Or alternatively, that they don't like being on their feet all day and that they maybe need to have a rethink about that. Again, it doesn't have to be, oh, this is the job for me. And again, I was delivering some career leader training yesterday, and somebody said it doesn't matter if somebody goes on a work experience for a job they've always thought they want to do, maybe like teaching, and after a week or two think, oh my goodness, I have no desire ever to work with children again. So it can be that you can learn things that, if you like, close off a possible career route to you rather than open up a career route. But there's so many thousands out there that it isn't a bad thing to think, oh, well, I'm no good at that. I mean, for example, I'm pretty impractical. Anybody who knows me well, I can think a lot. I can do things that require ideas and thought, but I'm a rubbish cook. I can't sew. I'm a decent driver, but a lot of practical subjects I'm just rubbish at. So no way would I ever have considered doing them as part of a career. I'm not very good at designing things either, really. I'm not very visual. So apologies if my slides are a bit dull and boring. So think about what is going on and what learning you want. And this is the model we use, okay? So how are you delivering your career learning? There are a number of ways you can do it, okay? The content and the method. So are you delivering, if you like, through a bunch of people who you've trained up? Are your tutors delivering, who may or may not be very well trained? Are you delivering through drop-down days? Do you actually have a lesson called Careers or Skills for Life or one of a million other titles? Well, I exaggerate, but there's plenty of them out there. Is it part of your PSHME or PSHE, or is it part of your citizenship? I don't know, and there is no one specific answer, but you need to think about it. Is it working? Is it a carousel model, which used to be quite popular, that careers people deliver to part of a year group at a time, but that can cause issues about timing, okay? And I'm just letting a couple of people in who've arrived later. So content and method, as I say, not all of you will choose to teach or emphasize exactly exactly all the same things in your career learning. Many of you will know I was a secondary teacher for quite a long time before I got into careers full time. And I came from a fairly working class background. My parents' parents, so my grandparents, were manual workers. My maternal grandfather was actually illiterate and worked in the steelworks in Sheffield. My paternal grandfather was a joiner. And then when my dad's mum remarried, she married a pit worker. So my parents, who were both teachers, if you like, were first generation higher education. Dad was a graduate. He'd been sent to a university post-national service. Mum wasn't a graduate, but she was teacher trained from a Methodist teacher training college. So I grew up from that sort of background. And I had at one point perhaps wanted to be a lawyer, barrister, whatever, actress as well. But there was a very strong emphasis from my parental socio-economic background that you didn't do things like be an actress because that was too unreliable and wouldn't work. And you didn't get into things like law because we haven't got enough money and enough family connections. I do remember my dad suggested I become an engineer, but instead of doing that, I followed him into the teaching profession. Now, I tell you this because I only realised the significance of career learning in some ways when I learnt about some of the occupational choice theories and the fact that socioeconomic ones, if you like, were so much where I had come from. My parental background and my original working class roots, though it was 2 generations before, meant that I was channeled and accepted certain constraints. Had I had a better careers education as a young woman, I might have broken that, but I didn't. So, do your youngsters need to have their socioeconomic constructs challenged? On the other hand, there is the developmental side. We can all do anything. Well, that might work for some people, but is that totally realistic? There's also the Trayton factor or the chaos there's a load of theories. So what is it you need to be using as well as thinking about the learning framework to ensure that you're doing the best for your learners, to help them think about what really fits them? Again, the idea that going to uni is an aspiration for lots of white collar people is fine, but does it always suit their children? Not necessarily. So, that sort of thing, what are you basing your learning on? Here's something that came out in 2012. I know that's quite a while ago, but it's important. Work-related education should be a planned provision to help young people learn about careers, learning and work so that they can manage their own development. Again, if any of you know our company, Complete Careers, we talk about our strapline is empowering successful transitions through learning and into work. I think that's important. Again, I joined the careers profession in my 40s full time. And it's about empowerment. It's not in many ways about telling people what's right or it's not about telling people what's right or what's wrong. And it's not about doing it for them, though unfortunately education sometimes has become a bit like that more so in some ways during the last 20 years. But it should be about helping young people to learn that the only person in the end of the day who can decide on their career and help them be successful and help them pass exams and who they can rely on and can make the choices is them. So they need to make well-informed, realistic decisions, perhaps. They need to understand their strengths and weaknesses, perhaps. They may need to understand that they're doing things to satisfy other people, perhaps to get parental approval. But there is that sense that young people ought to understand why they're doing things and why it fits them. Why do they want to go to university? Is it because mum and dad really want them to, or is it because they really want them to, etc.? So, having said all that, what's your current practice? Okay, and where is your careers learning in the curriculum? Is there enough time? I think start right at the beginning of your school journey. Sometimes now young people are already thinking about these things in primary, because again, if you can encourage them to broaden their horizons, begin to understand themselves, build their self-confidence, the sooner you can do it, the better. So what are you expecting from your year sevens? If that's where you start, where are they coming from? What inputs have they already had? If you're at college, what are you getting when they come in at 16? Unfortunately, different secondary schools may have given different learners a very different careers experience. So do they know what they're doing? Do they understand themselves? How independent learners are they, etc., etc., etc.? So these are questions you need, if you like, to be asking them yourself. And if they've got to review and develop their knowledge and skills, how are they also recording them to go back and review them? Do they write something about what they're thinking of being when they're 11 and then have a laugh about it by the time they're 16? Or do they write something when they're 16, they look back and think, yes, I still want to do that? So how is the learning assessed, recorded, and possibly even reported? And this is maybe something you don't think about too much, but most subjects in schools, parents get a report about. They're doing well in English, they're doing well in maths, they're doing well in science, or they're not doing so well. So how are they doing at preparing themselves for the world of work? How self-aware are they? How much are they fulfilling their potential? Have they got an idea about their future? Are they investigating it? Do they care? Have they engaged? They won't all engage at the same time. Some will engage much, much later. Some may never engage until they're well beyond school age. But ideally, the more you can get to engage and think about it, it's your future. School has a purpose well beyond passing exams, which is sometimes what I think kids think it's for. Who are the careers teachers? And what expertise and support and training do they get? So, can you answer these questions? And once you've answered them, are you happy with those answers? If you're not, then perhaps you have work to do on your career education programme. Again, I've come across schools sometimes where a head of year might be responsible for the career learning. But the problem is, if they don't talk to each other, how do you know that the career learning progresses through 3, 4, and 5? also remember that the youngsters are changing dramatically from 7 maybe to 11 or 13. They're going through adolescence. They're basically rewiring their brain. So they need to keep thinking about all these things and what are their ideas and how are they making progress? What does it mean to them? And where can they get help, information, support, and record what they know, and so on? How do you make sure there's things for everybody? And again, it may be that they're at different points in their learning journey. And again, there is the element that, okay, go and find out about a job. Some of them just need to know vaguely, others will want the detail. So again, what is going on here in your program to make sure there's differentiation and who can check up on it? Are you encouraging them maybe from very early on to begin to write what I would describe as a personal statement about themselves? Or also to put together a mini CV that then as they move up the school, they can develop? Do you think about doing that now as a sort of video performance, if you like? Because again, that may be what they're doing in 4 or 5 years' time. Again, when you think about teachers in departments, I know they are all very hard pressed. I know that they are all subject specialists. You probably started out as a subject specialist because you can't actually train as a careers teacher, which I think is very sad, but is the way it is. And I understand that it's been raised as an issue since back in the 80s, but has never been agreed by any government. You can now become a career leader, and there's lots of good training going on, but there's still nothing that sort of allows somebody who's doing teacher training to say, right, one of my subjects is careers. So you've got all these subject specialists and gaps before, and you're saying, right, I want you to talk about careers. I want you to help us to teach them about careers. So how do you do that without it making harder for them? And again, I think some of it is a lot easier than people think. It's not extra work, it's just a twist or a different approach. If kids aren't attending regularly or on time, an employer wouldn't be impressed by that. You can be sacked, if you like, for not attending regularly, so long as there's no real health ground, and potentially as well, lateness on a regular basis is not acceptable in the workplace. So if you're getting that in the school environment, teachers could flag it up. Transferable skills in a subject. Maybe somebody doesn't particularly like your subject, and that is difficult for a subject specialist. I used to teach English and maths, and I know if people didn't like reading and words, I used to think, oh, well, never mind, but they ought to, but they don't necessarily. So what is it I can sell it to them as an English specialist that is important? Well, it's so that they can read information, that they can pass information on if they need to. There are things that each subject will offer to a young person that whatever they're trying to do could be useful in their career. Marketing, advertising will use the written word, etc. So transferable skills, employability skills, meeting deadlines, being reliable, working with others, taking initiative, etc. Subject teachers should be able to get these things up fairly easily without too much additional work. Again, Another thing that I think sometimes, and I do apologise if your school or organisation or college is already doing this, and it won't have happened much in the last 9 months or a year because of COVID and the pandemic. But when your school is doing trips, if you like, if they're going to the theatre or to a sporting event or to visit a museum or a historical site or whatever they're doing, even a reward trip to Alton Towers or whatever, make sure that part of that trip is thinking about the jobs and the employment that they are encountering. If you go to the theatre to watch whatever is this year's set text, who works in the theatre? Okay, there's the actors, but who else? All the people associated from the technical side, etc. Same if you go to a museum. What are all the jobs related to working in a museum? Even when they go on university trips, do you make sure that somebody tells them that actually, yes, this is a place of learning and there are academic staff, but to keep a university functioning, you also need catering staff, site maintenance staff, loads of office workers. You know, there are lots of people in a university or even a school who are employed there, but not necessarily as part of the educational element of it. Again, hospitals are another example. And also other jobs that just are not visible, perhaps in the same way. When they go, as I say, a sporting event, who's all involved in that? There's people selling the tickets, running the catering, putting on the VIP boxes. There's people keeping the grass growing or whatever it is they're playing on. So there is a whole range of almost, if you like, invisible careers associated with things like trips. So again, I want people to think about those and encourage subject teachers to. And again, with these two, when you're bringing in either employers or further or higher education, how are you linking it to the learning? Okay. How are you ensuring that young people and their parents know about further and higher education, probably from year 7, and understand the progression, if you like? I sometimes find it amusing that kids will tell me that after year 11 I can go to university. Well, a few might, but the majority are more likely to go to sixth form or college. They seem to miss that bit out. Again, apprenticeships are so much different to what they were 5, 10, 20, 40 years ago. And again, are your staff and are your learners and are your parents familiar with all these new types of apprenticeships? Are you talking to them about free schools, UTCs, all the other options they might have at 14 and 16? Okay. And then how, when you're doing it with employers and HE, are they recording what they found out? What is it they learn? How are you encouraging ex-pupils to stay in touch with your organisation so that you can have a, if you like, pool of people who can interact with your learners? And these days, they don't necessarily need to come in. Again, one of the things I think COVID has taught us, you may be able to get an ex-pupil to zoom into an assembly or a classroom and talk about their job or their learning route. Lot less hassle for them than actually coming into the school. but it means you might be able to keep in touch with them. So are you using things like LinkedIn, Facebook as a community? Are you using IT in all its and social media in all its forms, not only to tell them what they shouldn't do, but also to help them sell themselves? Sixth formers, no harm in beginning to set up a profile of what they're good at. There are other platforms available, but it is about selling yourself. Not all jobs are specifically advertised. A lot of jobs, people are invited to go to an interview because these days of something that might be on LinkedIn or might be on, I don't know, Pinterest or something else. So making sure that the employer links are right, making sure that they know about the post-16, post-18 opportunities so that they've got time to think about them and understand what they are in Key Stage 3 as well as in Key Stage 4. I think I've nearly got to the end of this, so if anybody has any questions, I will be happy to take a few. But what I do want to say, if you choose to go down the route of acquiring the award through Complete Careers and CareerMark, we do have resources to help you with all this. Examples of good practice, ideas and suggestions. And that would where you would find them. Until you're a member, they are password protected. So it's not compulsory, and all I've been talking about will apply to any of the licensed awarding bodies that do the national quality and careers standard.